Moving countries can be one of the most exciting and most challenging things you'll ever do. And we're here to take one big worry off your plate: your taxes. At Expat Taxes, we understand the complexities of Irish tax from your perspective as an expat and tailor our advice to your needs. With decades of expertise, our team at Expat Taxes will help you navigate tax residency, cross-border taxation, reliefs and returns, and will work with your country's tax advisor to make sure your taxes are sorted. Whether you're an individual or a corporation coming from Australia, the United States, the UK, or anywhere in the world, we want to help you. So visit us at expattaxes.ie to book a consultation today, and let's make moving to Ireland easier together.
Welcome to Tax Bites for Expats, the top tax tips you want to know as an expat. The podcast is here to help answer the common queries and concerns expats have when moving to or from Ireland. Complex taxes explained simply. We'll focus on the Irish and international tax issues to be aware of to ensure you save time, money, and stress.
Hi everyone, hope you're well. Welcome to this episode of Tax Bites for Expats. Thanks to all the new listeners we've had join in recent months, and for the people who frequently on calls tell me that they listen. It's great to hear that we're getting people joining and listening, and please feel free to contact us and let us know what topics you'd like us to talk about. Today I want to talk about the 5 top tips to think about if you're planning your move to Ireland, the context of your taxes. We've covered each of these things throughout all the episodes, but I thought it might be good to have a brief episode for people to take away 5 things I'd like them to think about in advance of their move. So, just me, as you've probably gathered, and we'll jump straight in. The first one would be around understanding your tax residency status. So we've spoken about this previously. Compared to some of the rules that we see in other jurisdictions, the Irish tax residency rules are relatively straightforward. As a reminder, for anybody who hasn't heard us talk about it before, it's a days test. We're looking to count the number of days that you have in Ireland in a calendar year. If you exceed a certain number of days, you're a tax resident. It's quite straightforward in that regard. The tests that we're using or measuring are 183 days in a calendar year, or 280 days over the course of 2 years. So those 2 points are ones to be aware of. And by using those tests, you can answer the question, am I an Irish tax resident in the year I move? And if not, when will I become one? In addition to that, under the tip of know your residency status, I always think it's useful to understand your tax residency position in the country that you're leaving. So this is probably feeds into the second tip, which is consider having advice or a tax return preparer in both countries, particularly in the year you move. Why do I say that? Well, if we think about some of the countries where we have clients come to us from, to list them, the US, Canada, Australia, UK, to name but a few. Some of those jurisdictions have what are called exit taxes. So they can, in certain circumstances, not all, impose a tax on an individual when they're leaving the jurisdiction. It's not in every case, but it's always good to have a conversation with the tax advisor when you're planning to leave a country to check whether or not there's any implications in terms of income or assets you have or any actions that they'd like you to take. So the second tip is get 2 tax return preparers, one for the country you're leaving and one for the country you're arriving in. Because as we've mentioned many times on this podcast, the value in tax advice is generally much greater if taken in advance. In other words, take advice when planning and avoid, if possible, taking it after the fact. That's not to say there is no value to advice taken after the fact. It's just generally easier for us to provide solid advice before you move. So that's the second tip. Get 2 tax return preparers. On that point, we're frequently asked and contacted and asked, can you do my US and Irish return? Can you do my Irish and my UK return? Can you do my Irish and insert other country here return? The answer is no. And the reason for that is we are chartered tax advisors. We are registered with the Institute of Tax in Ireland. We are chartered accountants and practicing members of the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Ireland. Both those bodies regulate us, and they have CPD requirements. That's continuing professional development for anyone who's not familiar with the acronym. Charge fees, have obligations, many different aspects to, I suppose, how we operate as practitioners. And what's common in practice in Ireland is, and globally, not just in Ireland, is that it's very, very rare to have a tax advisor who is qualified and able to advise you on two jurisdictions at the same time. And that's across the board, whether you go from the big four accountants to your local accountant on the street. It's just very rare. So this is a common misconception that there is people out there who do both. They may exist. They are rare in practice. But that doesn't mean that we can't solve the problem. Because what's the problem? The problem is that you have an obligation to file a return in Ireland. You have an obligation to file a tax return in, for example, the US, Australia, UK, Spain, Italy, Portugal, Netherlands, Canada. I'm listing places where we have a solid referral network. So my point is this: a good advisor will be able to connect you with somebody in the other location where you have a requirement, and they'll be able to work with that person. So you should be able to, as a client, step back from the process and let the two advisors do their thing, work together, make your life easier, and do what they are qualified to do, which is to deal with the questions, obviously with the expertise of understanding the international angle in their own jurisdiction. Third tip: know your tax domicile. And if you don't know, speak to somebody who can give you advice on it. Good, solid advice. Tax domicile from an Irish perspective is such an important concept, and it's so frequently misunderstood by clients. Why do we focus on it so much? Well, in Ireland, there's a special basis of taxation. It's known as the remittance basis of tax. Very simply, it means that if you are non-Irish domiciled, you are not required to pay tax in Ireland on foreign income or foreign gains until you bring the income or gains to Ireland. So the implications of this vary depending on the taxpayer's profile, but it's such a useful thing to understand and take advantage of. And you can't do that until you're clear on your tax domicile. So speak to a tax advisor, get advice on your tax domicile, and please resist the urge to self-assess your domicile position, because particularly if your situation is slightly complex, it can be quite difficult to self-assess correctly without expert input. The third tip is understand the tax system. So a couple of small points that might be helpful for anybody who's listening, whether you're a returning Irish person or somebody coming to live in Ireland for the first time. A few small points about our tax system. It's calendar year. So you're moving from maybe an April deadline in the UK, a June deadline in Australia, a December deadline or year end, in the US, to calendar system here in Ireland. So it's quite similar to the US system in that regard. If you come to Ireland and you have an obligation to file a tax return, let's say you move in 2024, you have to file a tax return that year because we've determined that there's an obligation to do so. You must do so by the 31st of October in the following year. So it's quite a long lead-in period of time where before you need to do the return. But one important point: if you move to Ireland in 2024 and you have to do a tax return in 2025 by the deadline that we mentioned, and you have a tax payment to make, there's a preliminary tax system here, which very simply means you are in a prepayment situation with your taxes. And if you've moved to Ireland in the first year, you don't have to pay preliminary tax. You can choose to do so if you wish. However, when you come to do your tax return in 2025, you'll have to pay your 2024 bill and prepay your 2025 bill. And what that means is, if you haven't budgeted for the taxes, when you get to the payment point in October 2025, you're going to have a big outlay. So understand how the system works, understand how it applies to you. And again, I sound like a broken record, but try to do that in conjunction with an advisor so that you get the best outcome and the correct one the first time. The fifth point is learn to navigate Revenue's online system. Learn to use their website. Work out whether you are going to be using their My Account system, which We've had a recent podcast episode with Alan Purcell, who explained really, really well how that works and who it's for. Are you using My Account, which is a simple online system broadly designed for people who are employees and who have low levels of other income? Or are you required to register via Revenue's online system? So, for example, a lot of people who are retiring to Ireland or coming to live in Ireland and who might have foreign investment income are required to register for Revenue's online service, which is an online system whereby longer form tax returns, called colloquially in the industry Form 11s, are lodged. Everybody can log on to revenue.ie and familiarise themselves with the system. There's some really good information on Revenue's website. And I think Revenue recently installed a chatbot as well, where I think you can engage with it. I haven't personally used it, so I'm not too familiar with how functional it is, but it's a useful thing to know. But I would say this, and just bear this in mind, we do sometimes work with clients who ring Revenue and try to engage with them about complex international tax issues. If you don't get a clear answer or you're struggling to get traction, it's not just you. Revenue currently are struggling to deal with the volume of queries they're getting. I understand that they're also recruiting internally to try and build up their staff. But the point is this, they don't exist as a tax advisory service. So if you're struggling or you're finding it difficult to get answers to questions, which might, of course, seem basic or simple, consider speaking with an advisor just to try and get to the root of the issue quickly and resolve it. So there are 5 high-level points that you might take away. Hopefully some of them have been helpful and they would be applicable for some, not for others, and broadly geared towards people who are in the planning phase or have recently moved to Ireland. And if you want me to help you with any of the issues you're facing, check out the show notes. It'll refer you to expattaxes.ie, where you can book a consultation with myself directly or one of the team. We'd be more than happy to help. And this is what we do day in, day out, helping clients of ours navigate the stressful time that is planning their move to Ireland. But yeah, drop us a note, info@expattaxes.ie, and let us know what you'd like to hear us talk about. And we look forward to catching up with you next time.
Thanks for listening to Tax Bites for Expats. Please do leave a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcast. And as always, remember to take professional tax advice specific to your personal circumstances before acting or refraining from action in connection with the matters dealt with in this series. The material in this podcast is intended to give general guidance only.